for those that are interested. The first thing is for those that are not interested in it technically, you don't actually have to be technical to do this. You actually just get to push the button and shoot normal cinematography, and it just works. It happens in camera. So here we're going to look at some stuff. We're going to loop this a few times so you'll be able to see what's going on. So the outside is obviously pretty bright, right? It's not technically clipped. It's just very bright, and the inside is very, very dark. So we're looking at about 13 stops. We're looking at kind of what you could get away with an MX sensor in a light-dark situation. But when you see the next loop of this, what's happening is that there are two exposures being shot simultaneously. There's one for the outside and one for the inside. And watch what happens in the next exposure. Now, this is not another exposure. This is the same shot. So look at how much is on the outside now. See that tin roof? So that's Las Vegas in the middle of the day. That tin roof is completely nuclear. With any camera, normal shooting, even a red, it's just completely gone. But in this case, it's not only gone, it's completely properly exposed. Now, if you kind of remember the last shot you saw, and it'll come up again, the inside is also properly exposed. So when we take it into a grading suite, we can take that outside exposure, and it'll come up in a second, this inside exposure, and blend them together, which is something that simply could not be done before HDR existed in a motion picture realm. So you can see how completely clean and noise-free that is, and how far we're pushing the bottom end, and you saw how much we could protect the top end. So when we conjoin these two frames, you get sort of this photographic miracle. Everybody get that? Pretty neat, right? And we've already done some stuff. We've handed this off to a grading artist, and he's actually put the two pieces together in a way that it's actually a bit otherworldly. So that's kind of the neutral exposure there, right? Where we've set it for both pieces, but we would, in HDR mode, we would grade this piece down and hold that. As you can see, it's all there. Now this one, not quite as dramatic visually, but actually even more interesting, because if you look at all the neon, and you look at all these lights, if you were to do this shot with a normal camera, it would look okay, but all that neon would be blown out. It would be all right. You'd be able to use it, but it wouldn't look like this in any way, shape, or form. Because what you're looking at is effectively all the way closed on one part of the exposure and all the way open on the other part. There's no additional light being brought in to light this bottom part of the scene, right? So you see that's pretty interesting. Now, watch it one more time. Oh, well, that's all you get. But I don't know if we have time. I'd love to run it one more time. I want you guys to. Yeah, that last piece that we just ran. It's all together, so we'll have to watch the barn stuff again. But I want you guys to watch it again. While I talk about the second one, just watch the barn again. Oh, that's the tiger. I'm going to show you that next. Can we go back to the other one? So with that HDR mode, what we were worried about, and rightly so worried about, was that when you're shooting these two conjoined frames, where one image is at a proper exposure and the other image is at a very short exposure, that you're changing the way we view motion pictures, right? And we're changing the way we view motion blur. So is he going to run this through? So when we watch that Vegas stuff again, if it does come up, I want you to take particular note of the fire truck as it drives by. Because something really interesting happens, and this is one of these sort of amazing learning experiences that we get when we push the envelope and don't exactly know what's going to happen. The dynamic of motion blur is something that we have been trained to learn to accept as cameras shoot motion, which is when things move quickly, they just blur. But to our eyes, interestingly enough, our eyes are actually HDR-style devices. We read out really quickly with our eyes. So just watch me for 1 second. Don't watch this. If I move my hands like this, you see a motion blur trail, and you also see that my hand is there, right? It's not just a big blur. You know my hand's there, and you see motion. So interestingly enough, when we get to that other clip, which we'll see in about 10 seconds or so, what happens with this version of HDR that we're doing for motion pictures is something that's this happy accident that's really interestingly beneficial. is that we're actually now creating motion more the way our eyes see motion, which is we see the information and we see the motion blur trail. And we showed this to a bunch of people in Hollywood, and everyone has said, this looks very natural to their eyes. It's not bothersome or unusual, even though it's actually photographically unusual by the fact that it's never actually been done before. But the fact that our eyes can see it, I mean, you can see that that's the other side of what's beneficial about this, is holding so much range across that shot. So tell me when this comes up, and I want you to watch specifically for what these motion trails can do. And you guys tell me if you like it as much as we like it. If you don't, interestingly enough, you get to dial in the effect. So when you take this HDR shot into post, you have the two frames, and you can choose how much of the HDR effect you want by just essentially moving some sliders around. So if you don't like all of the range, let's say you set it for 3 or 4 stops and you only need 1 or 2 stops, you can choose that in post, so you're not locked into anything. The other thing that's really beneficial is we're not shooting this in any unusual way to create the HDR. The A frame, the normal first frame, is just at normal, proper exposure. So it's not like you're shooting one dark and one light. You're shooting one normal and one essentially very dark or very short exposure. So if you choose not to use the HDR, there's no penalty. The only real penalty is the fact that you have a little more data because you're actually shooting twice as many frames. Now watch the truck. See how we can read the words Las Vegas, and you also see the motion blur? If we had shot this with a film camera or with any video camera or with a normal red, as it drives by, you would see it be blurry. But now we actually see both things. But it doesn't bother you, right? Your brain accepts that because that's how our brain sees the world. So guess what? We win. It's pretty cool. And the last thing we'll show you, so now we can go to the other DCP with the Tiger, was a shot we did with a Canon zoom about 20 feet away from the Tiger. So we weren't that close. But that's an epic frame. So that's looking at 5K. And we're looking at it on a fairly low-res device. I mean, it still looks pretty great, right? But you're only looking at it in 2K here because this is a normal sort of cinema installation with a 2K projector. But look at how much detail comes from the fact that we're oversampling so much, that we're working from a big 5K resolution file and showing it to you at 2,000 lines. So it starts at 5,100 lines and there it is in motion. Pretty cool, huh? Look at all of the detail. Look at every individual hair that you can see on this thing. And look at its mouth. This is stuff that simply doesn't exist with other cameras. Except for 65mm film, basically. This is now beating the resolution of a 35mm analog film frame. By quite a bit, interestingly enough. Okay. So that's my eye candy to show you guys. We'll go back to the Mac and finish up some of the talk. Pretty great stuff, right? Okay, so that's